So, hello guys, in this stream and the resulting video of this, I will be going over a topic that I tried to do in a previous stream, but that stream just didn't work out to a quality I was happy with, so I'm redoing it now. Also, the subject of that stream has developed quite substantially since I did that stream about a week ago. And that is going to be on what the Russians are doing in Kherson, in Zaporozhe, and potentially in Kharkov, Nikolaev, and Odessa if they end up taking those territories in the future. And that is, the hypothesis I'm running with is that especially in Kherson, and there's been events that have come out today, the past couple of days, and today is the 16th of April, 2022, that seem to corroborate the original thesis that I was running with in the original stream, and that is that Russia is looking to break off parts of Ukraine in sort of the same vein as Donetsk and Lugansk in 2014 and Crimea, but obviously now they're doing it while these territories are occupied by the Russian military during this war. Pardon me, but just before we get into that part of the stream, there is one thing I want to go over. Quickly bring this up. Is I want to quickly, I'm not going to go specifically too deep into the events of the Moskova, but I'm just for some interesting footage has come out today to dispute certain claims. And the claim that I'm going to be talking about is the big story for people who aren't aware, although if you are following this stuff, I'm sure you are aware. I should pause that because I don't know if that'd be copyright struck or whatever, but it's just a headline that we need to focus on. Is that the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, the missile cruiser Moskova, sank 2-3 days ago in the Black Sea. It looks, emphasis on looks, it looks like it was struck by 2 Ukrainian anti-ship missiles somewhere off Serpent Island and was heavily damaged. Then while it was being towed back to Sevastopol, it appears that in stormy seas that the ship essentially floundered and sank. And obviously this is large story during the war, but for this we're just going to focus in just kind of a little pointer on how you can sort of chase some stuff up on yourself, how you yourself, if you're minded to do this stuff, how you could try and corroborate or disprove claims of stuff like this. So the specific claim that we're going to be looking at is that the captain of the Moskova, Anton Kuprin, died with his vessel, that he went down with the ship. So this is the Independent article. If you just Google Anton Kuprin, you'll see all kinds of Western media articles coming out and talking about the death of the captain of the ship. So, captain of sunken Russian warship Moskova killed in explosion, says Ukraine. First-rank captain Anton Kuprin, 44, died during an explosion and fire aboard the vessel. So that is the claim that's going about. How can we... Well, essentially what I'm going to be doing here is we're going to be doing a bit of debunking before we get properly into the Kherson part of the stream. We are going to look at debunking that claim and how can we potentially debunk that claim, being good little fact checkers that we are, is the Russians have released footage today. Find it. Was it? Yeah, so the Russians released footage today here. So, just the one down here. So this is my translation of it, which I did for Yandex translation. The Commander-in-Chief of the Navy, Admiral Nikolai Evmenov, and the commander of the Black Sea Fleet held a meeting with the crew of the missile cruiser Moskova, or Moscow in English, in Sevastopol, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. So that's kind of interesting in a number of ways, because there is also a story that the commander of the Black Sea Fleet was arrested the other day. Let me just refresh. I believe it was like Admiral Ofilov. Let me just refresh his name and get a look at him as well. Igor Osipov. Bring him up just so that is the guy. So that is the commander of the Black Sea Fleet, because we are going to be looking at some of the people in this footage and how we can potentially identify them and maybe debunk this claim. So this gentleman is the commander of the Black Sea Fleet, Admiral Osipov. This is Anton Kuprin. He is the reported commander, the captain of the Moskova. And then I don't really think I need to bring up the actual footage of the head of the Russian Navy. He's the guy with grey hair that will appear in this footage. But maybe it's just a translation, but I found it interesting that they said the commander of the Black Sea Fleet held the meeting as well. Osipov, from my understanding, he was actually arrested in the aftermath of the Moskova sinking, but we will have a look and see what we can see in this footage. So this is the footage here. So what we are looking at, this is reported to be the crew of the Moskova. This is obviously a parade ground in Sevastopol. Two quick things to note. I did look at the weather. It does look like there was clear skies across Sevastopol, relatively clear skies. So, you know, if it was heavily raining across Sevastopol over the past week, this footage obviously wouldn't be from past week in Sevastopol. So that's one way I had a look, just because another allegation that was made, this could be recycled footage. Maybe because the Moskova obviously being the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, the head of the Russian Navy will probably come and hold inspections with the crew on a regular basis, so this could have been recycled footage. So just one thing I had a quick look at was the weather, to check what the weather was like the past couple of days since it was sank. So this gentleman here, I am pretty sure is Anton Kuprin. So just bear in mind, if I bring his picture, no, don't show all the tabs. So if we bring his picture across, this to me looks very much like this gentleman here. Granted, it's not the best picture, but that to me does look like Anton Kuprin. Like, his nose isn't completely different. His eyes, I don't want to say he has like those Asiatic eyes, but he has sort of like those sort of Slavic kind of eyes. I don't know if I'm like being really racist now or something, but you know, there's a lot of Russians have a very particular set of eyes, and that's what that looks to me. The other thing is that here he has the rank of a captain of the second rate. Here he is a captain of the first rate, which is what he was. So this must be an older photo before he got promoted. As you've seen in the claims from the Independent and from Ukrainian sources, they were reporting that Anton Kuprin was a first-rate captain, and these 3 stars on his epaulette match that up. So, granted, maybe not completely exact, but I'm willing to believe that this gentleman is this gentleman here. So if this is indeed recent footage and not recycled footage, and I'm willing to believe this is recent footage, is Anton Kuprin is alive. He made it off the ship. So on that basis, I think that we can debunk the story that the captain died. So that's the head of the Russian Navy. I believe it's Admiral Isemrov, I believe his name is, or probably horrifically pronouncing it. So these are the officers, and this is the enlisted seamen. Play a bit of the footage. The other thing to realize is some people have physically counted each individual person that they could see here, and it's around about 50 men in each rank, so about 100. The Moskova, I believe, has a crew of around about, or did have a crew around about 500 men. So maybe there is some truth to that. Some of the crew, maybe a lot of the crew, did die during the attack. If it was an attack, maybe they're just injured or they're in hospital.
Личный состав крейсера «Москва» находится в основном в пункте базирования в городе-герое Севастополь. Офицеры, мичманы,
Again, I don't know if it was just the poor translation that Yandex give me, but the way the translation says that the commander of the Black Sea Fleet, I'm assuming that's what that is saying there, who is supposed to be Osipov, this gentleman here. I did not, and I can't seem to spot that gentleman in this footage at all. I guess it potentially could be him, but that's the kind of uniform that Russian army officers wear. He's also got a bit of a fat belly on him as well. typical staff officer, I guess. But yeah, that's kind of a Russian army uniform. Whereas, as you can see, the Russian Navy, if the head of the Russian Navy has come to inspect you, it's get out the dress uniforms. And that's why all the naval staff are in black uniforms, whereas this gentleman is in Russian army fatigues. Maybe I just don't understand the nuances. Maybe there's a specific Russian naval uniform that he is a part of. But you don't see him again, so I doubt it's going to be this Osipov fellow, because the allegation is that he was arrested in the aftermath of the Moskova incident. I guess one aspect of what it could be, if I just have a quick look, maybe he has been rapidly replaced if he was indeed arrested. He was arrested by the Russian FSB, reported on April 16th. Well, that was today. Potentially, either way, he doesn't appear in that footage, whereas the commander, well, a person who very much looks like the captain of the Moskova does appear in that footage. So, pardon me. So maybe that was probably not as expansive as it should have been, but yeah, that's kind of how we could have looked into that story. Whenever the Russian military released that footage, we could look at the footage, see who's in the footage, who we can positively identify, and cross-reference. Like I say, I had a look at the weather across Crimea. The weather seems to have matched what we could see in the footage. So, plus the fact that all the naval personnel in that footage are wearing maybe not quite full-on winter uniforms, but that they're not wearing summer uniforms. These are fairly heavy jackets, so it does sort of mimic the temperature and the weather that is in Crimea at this stage. So could be recycled footage, but nothing in this footage strikes me as, okay, this is not recent. So as far as I'm concerned, Anton Kuprin, the commander of the Moskova, he's still alive. If he's here meeting the head of the Navy with his men, he's not been arrested. He's alive. So that Ukrainian claim that Western media has just picked up and run with as if it's a fact, through this footage alone, that does not look to be factual. So that was just a quick thing that I wanted to point out there, before we get into the main thing of this flag. So we'll get into the main part of the stream now. So this flag is the purported flag that was arranged in 2014 for what was dubbed then as the Kherson People's Republic. What is the Kherson People's Republic? So where did I put my handy Google map? Lost my phone. Go. There it is there. So, just a very quick history lesson to give you guys a background on this stuff. So, in 2014, you had the Euromaidan, mostly based in Kiev. Through the Euromaidan, the government of Viktor Yanukovych was overthrown. And as a result of that, the more Russophone parts of Ukraine, predominantly in the east and in the south, started to rise up in their own protest movements as a counter-Maidan. So, obviously, Crimea completely, it didn't really break away on its own. The Russian military came in peaceably, if you could call it peacefully. There was no one killed really for it. There was no fighting, but Crimea left Ukraine, ascended to the Russian Federation. In Donetsk and Lugansk, they held quasi-referendums. They broke away from Ukraine. That devolved into a sort of civil war, secessionist war in the east of the country around the two self-proclaimed secessionist republics that actually did break away. In Kharkov, for a day, Kharkov very much looked like it was going the same way as Donetsk and Lugansk. Local pro-Russian population in the city. That's not to say it was the majority of the city, but local pro-Russian demonstrators took over the local regional administration buildings, rose the flag of the Russian Federation, proclaimed the independence of the Kharkov People's Republic. The Ukrainian forces in the city and the Ukrainian SBU, the special Investigation Bureau very rapidly came back in, retook control of the regional administration, and re-established Ukrainian government control of Kharkov. That kind of spelled the death of that attempt. In Odessa, there wasn't really an attempt as such in the vein as there was in east in the country, but there was a very strong pro-Russian movement in Odessa. It was looking to potentially, if not succeed, to federalize Ukraine. That movement kind of died a death after a very gruesome incident where around about 48 pro-Russian demonstrators were burned to death quite horrifically in the Trade Congress building in the city, whenever local Ukrainian ultra-nationalists threw Molotov cocktails into the building and burned it down with the protesters inside. No one's ever been convicted of that. No one's ever been held to account of that. The legacy of that looms large over Odessa to this day, and that's probably why the very substantial, if it's a majority is another question, but why the substantial ethnically Russian and pro-Russian contingent within Odessa has remained quite quiet and mute to this day because of that event in 2014 very much dampened the entire movement there. There was pro-Russian protests all across the south of Ukraine in 2014. In Kherson, there wasn't an attempt to break away or anything like that, but there was protests in Kherson itself. Through those, I believe it might have been more of an online movement, but through the online movement, the anti-Maidan, counter-Maidan, whatever way you might describe it, is this flag came about, and this is the purported flag of the Kherson People's Republic. So why am I talking about this? Because 8 years after the theoretical attempt to establish this republic, it very much looks like it is now coming into fruition. So, yep, I do believe that should have all been streamed okay, shared okay. So, we're doing well so far. No disasters like the last chat. So why am I saying that this seems to be coming to fruition? So I was planning to redo this stream from the stream that didn't go so well last time, but obviously the events of today have kind of thrown that all for a bit of a kilter and thrown me a bit off. Thrown me a bit off track. So this will have to be a bit of wing, but this emerged today. This post here from Bella Acta Intel, Urgent News and Archives, and quote, according to Ukrainian channels, on today, the 16th of April, 2022, the Ombudswoman of Ukraine, Miss Ludmila Denisova, said that the Russian Military Civic Provisional Administration of Kherson region, Oblast, is planning a referendum in the region on the early days of May 2020. A quote, according to eyewitnesses, the printing house in Novaya Kakhovka prints ballots for the referendum. Obviously, all protocols on the result of the vote will be prepared in advance and brought to the regional centre, Denisova said. She also stressed that the referendum is planned to be held from May 1st to May 10th, 2020. During this period, the Russian forces intend to close Kherson for entry and exit and cut off all communications from the rest of Ukraine, probably via electronic warfare means. Then there is if I can just find the specific, here we go. So, for people who aren't aware, today/yesterday, and this has been going on for a while, and I'll probably touch on it a bit later, is the Russians established their own news channel in Kherson and Zaporozhe. I believe it's called Kherson 24, although this says Crimea 24, but there was a separate channel established in the occupied territories. This must be a news outlet in Crimea reporting on it, and this is...
В Госдуме России презентовали благотворительную программу «Херсонская народная республика» в городах и селах.
Why am I playing you something in Russian if most of you probably don't speak Russian, but there are a very specific term that this woman has just said, so keep an eye out for the term Kherson Narodная Respublika. Narodnya is people in Russian, Respublika, I'm sure everyone knows, is Republic, and Kherson being Kherson. So
Херсонская народная республика в городах и селах. Благотворительную программу Херсонская народная республика в городах и селах.
This is a news anchor for a television station in Crimea referring to the Kherson People's Republic as if it is an on-the-ground fact. As pointed out with the caption here, on Russian channel Crimea 24, the anchor already refers to the Kherson region as the Kherson People's Republic. That is an entirely separate and succeeded political entity from Ukrainian central government. So, probably all a bit winded, but what does this mean? It means that the Russians are going to break off Kherson, and I've been speaking about this for a while, hinting at it for a while, because it's been on the cards for a while, but it looks like now the Russians are starting to put together in action their plan, their... Apologies, so give me a second. Sorry, it wasn't very professional. I just had to quickly turn something off. The Russians are now starting to enact their long-term plan in the Kherson region, and this could potentially spread out into Zaporozhe, potentially Kharkov, other areas. So, problem is this stream originally, because it was going to be a repeat of the previous stream that didn't go so well. This stream was going to be presenting the evidence of why I thought this was going to happen, but it's kind of moot because now it is happening and the Russians seem to be directly moving in that direction themselves. But I'll just bring up some of the big examples of it. So if I can just bring up the example of this Russian TV station that was brought up today. Can't find it quite off the top of my head, but yeah, back a few months ago, in fact, I will bring up the ever so delightful Galina. There was a post, so just going back as we touch on to an earlier post, there's a city which, in fact, I should probably get all these little. I put that there. So there is a city in, well, I guess it's technically in Zaporozhe, in Melitopol here. Whenever the Russians, within the first couple of weeks that the Russians took over the city, they deposed the local pro-Ukrainian mayor, a man called Ivan Fedorov. He was detained. Then he was eventually handed over back to Ukrainian control as part of a prisoner swap. But in the process of that, the Russians installed a woman called Galina Danilichenko, who became effectively the pro-Russian mayor in the city. So this was back on the 13th of May. I thought that would have brought it up straight away, but I've been keeping tabs on what's been happening in Melitopol, especially from Galina. He's helped kind of develop this narrative that's developed. She has come out and made various statements that the local population in Melitopol needs to sort of accept the new order of things. She also signed a decree, I believe it was, around about mid-March, authorizing the broadcast of Russian television and Russian radio within Melitopol and the Rayon. Rayon is like the local provincial administrative unit below an oblast within that part of Melitopol and this part of Zaporozhe. So obviously that plan is now starting to spread completely, come to manifest in Kherson. But also what else has been happening in Kherson? Spell it correctly, if I can immediately bring up Erindogar. That was a good example of it today. Not quite what I was looking for, but this will help anyway. So, for people who've been in the channel long enough, and especially since the first days, they will remember that I made particular note that whenever the Russians went into parts of Ukraine, be it in the south, be it in the parts of the north they took, maybe not so much in Kiev, but certainly in these areas, especially this area here, whenever the Russians moved into new towns and took them over, the Russians seemed to make a very specific point that they would not take down the Ukrainian flag, they would not remove symbols of Ukrainian statehood, is that the Russians, what they were putting out to the local population is that they were there to sort of liberate the people from this corrupt Banderist neo-Nazi gang in Kiev. That seems to have been the overall policy across Ukraine up until maybe about 2-3 weeks into the conflict. And I think there was sort of a strategic assumption made in Moscow that, I know there's a lot of people who dispute the idea of the short war. I've not seen any evidence that these people have really put forward to sort of to kind of push back against it. But for people who aren't aware, there's sort of this idea that because of the way the Russians went into the invasion to begin with, is that they assumed that it was going to be a very quick war, is that the Ukrainians would not have been able to put up a lot of fight. That was explained by the way the Russians landed in Hostomel, the way the Russian advanced into the east of the country, mostly was focused on just going along the roads and the highways as fast as they could, as far as they could, instead of consolidating ground. With some of the way the Russians organized their logistics, it didn't seem that they were expecting to be in Ukraine long. And from a lot of the statements of what the Russian prisoners in the first couple of weeks were saying, is that their commanders told them that if they did tell them at all, that whenever they go into Ukraine, is that they would be facing essentially scattered resistance, and in most places they'd be welcomed. So that's what I genuinely think is what the Russian high command expected, is this quote-unquote quick strike into Kiev, disorient, take out, however you want to take it, remove the command and control of the Ukrainian army within the first week or so, and then over the space of the next couple of weeks, the Russian army would go through Ukraine, and where there is scattered and confused Ukrainian resistance, is they would wrap that up as it goes along. So with that in mind, is that would entail that the Russians, had they been able to achieve that, is they would then have just been able to put in a new government in Kiev, or they could have compelled Zelensky to sign a peace treaty negotiations with him on their terms quite substantially, however it worked. Essentially, Ukraine, it would largely be territorial intact, maybe apart from the east, but the Russians would have been in and out, extracted what they needed. The war would have been done and dusted by now, and it would have been a fait accompli. The facts on the ground would have reflected it. Obviously, that hasn't happened. And I think what is happening in Kherson is a reflection of that. So for the first couple of weeks in the south of Ukraine, the Russians did not take down Ukrainian flags. They kept Ukrainian flags up. They removed some of the more nationalistic, sort of like, I don't want to say Banderist, but the more nationalistic Ukrainian. So certain banners supporting various Ukrainian national battalions, various slogans, they removed that, but they did not take down like the Ukrainian trident emblem off buildings. They didn't paint over Ukrainian the blue and golden symbols on various buildings. They did not take down the Ukrainian flag for the first couple of weeks, whereas since then they have, and they've been doing it in a very big way. And what I think this is just my assumption. You can either take it or leave it, and I know people will probably very much disagree with it, but this is my train of thought for it. So the quote-unquote short war has not worked out. Russia is now in this for a penny and a pound. The Russians are going to fight this to win it, no matter the cost. I could expand on this. I might do it in a bit. But the Russians are now committed completely to this fight. The Russians now view this is a war we have to win. And we are going to win this one way or another, no matter how long it takes. But it's going to cost us a lot more blood. It's going to cost us a lot more toil and treasure to do it. So the Russians are going to be looking to extract more from Ukraine in compensation for the effort they've had to put in to defeat Ukraine. So, short war, put in a friendly government in Ukraine. They can control that government, have exorbitant influence across that government. And that government could potentially, however, it's all hypothetical, but essentially the Russians could then have demanded, as part of the peace treaty in this new government in Ukraine, the Crimean Canal will be opened, and you will federalize Ukraine. It will no longer be a unitary state, however you want to word it. But part of this treaty is the Crimean Canal will not be messed with. It will not be obstructed. Well, the war is not the short war. It is now going to be a protracted war. It's going to be a bitter war. It is, but it's already bitter. It's very bitter. It's very bloody, and both sides are really committed and really starting to hate each other over it, especially the Ukrainians against the Russians. So I think the strategic assumption in terms of Kherson that's been made in Moscow is no matter what way this war ends, no matter what happens with the Ukrainian government, is the Ukrainian government after the war is just going to be completely anti-Russian. Whatever is left of Ukraine after this war, the Ukrainian population is now just universally anti-Russian. They will not deal with Russia. They will try and obstruct Russia to any extent that they can. So the Russians have probably now assumed that, well, even if we do try and get the big points we want to extract from Zelensky, not member of NATO, recognition of Crimea, independence of the Donbass, okay, yeah, we might still get that, but the problem is we can there is just no political will or capital in Ukraine that we can see going forward to allow the free flow of water through Kherson if it returns to Ukrainian control into Crimea. And that is a big problem for the Russians. Just a quick overline of Crimea. Crimea, historically, it's been, especially during the Soviet period, it was very famed for its vineyards, very big wine-producing country. It's a very big agricultural region. But it is not self-sufficient in water, despite being surrounded by water. But this is seawater. So all this agricultural land, as you can quickly see, this is just farms and fields all across it. In the south, in the mountains, this is vineyard country. It is agriculture all the way across Crimea. The entire peninsula is just sort of one big farm, apart from Sevastopol, which is a massive naval base. But it's not self-sustaining in water. So where does it get its water? This here. You follow it up. Well, that's not it. That's it here. It here. Okay, yeah. This here is the Crimean Canal. That's a dike. Not that type of dike. I know what some people are thinking. Here, you can see water in this side, completely dried out on this side to the extent it's now growing with bushes. This is a dam that the Ukrainians built post-2014 to block the flow of water. It comes down through this canal from the Dnieper into Crimea, which then goes down into, is that the reservoir here? Yep, into this. Some of these reservoirs, as you can see, this reservoir is nowhere near full capacity. So Crimea is not self-sufficient in water. It relies on the Crimean Canal, which was built, I believe, in Soviet times. The Ukrainians blocked it, and since then there's been a very acute water shortage in Crimea, and it's devastated the local agriculture. So the Russians, in terms of Crimea, economically, it's not been the best news for them, because now they're saddled with a place that used to be very productive agriculturally, but now they have to subsidize to keep afloat economically because of the water situation there. So the Russians are looking to make Crimea economically productive, especially going forward with the sanctions, as the Russians need to look to try and where they can make money back, and that is one of the big areas where they can. Crimean Canal was one of the opening day objectives of the Russian army. It's one of the ones they actually did achieve. They blew up that canal, from my understanding, is weeks ago. Is these reservoirs up in the Simferopol mountains? They're at full capacity. The local farmers in Crimea are more than happy. Their fields are watered again. They're expecting a bumper crop for the first time in almost a decade. So very good politics domestically in Crimea. It's a very big feel-good story for Russian population in domestically across Russia. You know, this is our government. This is Russia. Russia is standing up for Russians in Crimea, allowing them to water, earn a living, produce food. You know, it's very good domestically for Russia. Economically, it's good for Moscow as well. But obviously, if Kherson returns to Ukrainian control, the viability of that canal to remain open is very much in doubt. Because if the resentment in Ukraine post-2014, is nothing compared to the resentment in Ukraine against Russia now. It would be hard to imagine how, if they return Kherson to Ukrainian control after this war, but they extracted Donbass, NATO and Crimea, how a Ukrainian government is not just going to reblock the canal. Essentially, the Russians, I think, have kind of realized there is no road forward with Ukraine. That is long since lost, and this war has now parted Russia from Ukraine, potentially forever, but for decades. So now it's salvage what we can out of Ukraine. So that is what I think is we are seeing in Kherson. So if I can just bring up this example, which I kind of meandered off whenever I came onto that little spiel. The other thing is, I'll go into some of the examples of why I was thinking this, and it's obviously since been corroborated to a degree. So a couple of these examples are going to be from Erindugar, from Kherson, from Melitopol, and I'm not too sure if I'll touch on Skadovsk, but I'll take a couple of examples of various incidents that's happened across this region. So bear in mind that Erindugar and Melitopol, they're not actually in Kherson, they're actually in Zaporozhe Oblast. So the Russians might have eyes beyond Kherson and into Zaporozhe as well. But so this is an example from Erindugar, which is this city up here. This is the city next to the nuclear power station, the largest in Europe. There's also the thermal power station here. I think it's a natural gas-fired power station. This is this place here, which the Russians took, I don't want to say without a fight, but the Russians didn't really have to fight a lot to take this city whenever they did take it. So here it is here. So in Erindugar, a bank of the Russian Sberbank is said to have opened operation 8 years after Crimea entered Russia. Sberbank is opening branches in Kherson, but still none in Crimea. A comment says, Sberbank opened in Erindugar. Residents of the city will now be able to cash out their accruals, accrue essentially, accrue in their money. They can exchange their hryvnia for rubles. So another incident that's been happening across this area for the past couple of weeks is the Russians have formally trying to phase out the use of Ukrainian hryvnia for the Russian ruble. And this is an example of it. So this is just
15 апреля 2022 года в городе Энергодар совместно с усилиями Росгвардии и местной администрации начал работу Сбербанк.
From my understanding is they basically left Ukraine post 2016 because of the sanctions. But as this comment says, is that curiously, Sberbank, which is the Russian state, owns quite a large stake in that bank. It does not have branches in Crimea, but yet they're now opening branches in Kherson, which is an interesting dynamic there. But obviously, the Russian state is not going to be opening state-owned banks in Kherson if it doesn't have long-term ambitions in the region. So that's one example there. I will just quickly go to the other example. If this... Bring up ruble. At this footage. Yeah, so this is other footage from Melitopol, also in Zaporozhe, but in the same area. Is local fuel station. The other aspect is... I will meander on that. So essentially, this local fuel station, it is only accepting rubles for the payment. It is not accepting. За то, что они справа поставляют нам топливо и приезжайте заправлять. So local commerce is starting to transition away from the use of the hryvnia to the ruble. Can't really read that, but there is ruble there, euro, and dollar. Assuming this must be local residents trying to change their hryvnia into. So that is another example of that. Just on that point, while it is in my head, just also bear in mind that this is an active war zone, or it was. This is in Russian-occupied Ukraine, if that's the term you want to use. this is civilian traffic that are picking up fuel. Obviously, the logistics to the refueling of this petrol station, it's not going to be coming from Ukrainian-held territory. So the Russians have already established, I don't know if civilian is the right word, but there is fuel resources coming from Russia to serve the local population in civil needs within Kherson. So the Russians are keen to get agriculture in, well, I'll go into agriculture in a second, but just the general commerce function of a local economy is very keen to try and get that back up. Because generally, you would have expected in a war zone, this would all be rationed. It probably is rationed to a degree, but you know, the Russians would prioritize fuel to other areas in the active war zone. Especially as that's what the Ukrainians are doing, but obviously Russia has a glut of fuel, whereas the Russians have targeted Ukraine's strategic fuel reserves. But either way, the local population is able to find fuel in petrol for their vehicles and for local commerce in the region, so that's another aspect of that. Find the next point. Right, let's have a look at that. Need to learn how to spell this city's name right. Rindobar. Dohar. I've got channel. And here for me. Good about between various points. Look. Nope. The point I am looking for at the moment is I'm looking for examples of where in recent weeks the Russian soldiers in the area in Kherson and Zaporozhe have actually been, okay, here it is. This is what I'm looking for. So this is what has been happening in, this is the Cyrillic, as you can see. This is the entrance to Erindugar. This is Erindugar in Cyrillic. And as you can see, it used to be in the Ukrainian blue and gold. Now it is in the Russian national colors, although I don't think white really reflects well against that white background, but sure that wasn't on the Russian mind whenever they did it. But now Ukrainian colors have been replaced by Russian national colors. And the quotation says, this is from a pro-Ukrainian source, so the occupants. Occupant is sort of like a term that various post-Soviet republics use to refer to Russians derogatorily, but the occupants repainted the stele at the entrance to Erindugar's in the colors of the Russian tricolor, and then Ukrainians say it won't be there for long. Brings up more stuff. Here we go. And I brought this up quite a lot in the previous streams, but this is also in Erindugar, and this is the Soviet victory banner that has been raised over the city. The local Ukrainian flag was taken away from the local administration. This is the local administration building. As you can see, the Russian national flag has replaced the Ukrainian flag above the administration building in Erindugar. So, yeah, in contrary to what the Russians did in the first couple of weeks, is now they are actively removing the symbols of Ukrainian statehood and Ukrainian nationality and replacing it with Russian ones. So just for people who aren't aware of the nuances of this banner, obviously it has the Soviet hammer and sickle. You should not read this as a Soviet flag. You should not look at this and say, oh, that's a communist flag. This is specifically the victory banner. This is the flag that the Soviet soldiers raised over the Reichstag at the end of the Battle of Berlin. And through that, it is now sort of emerged into Russian national consciousness as sort of like a, you should view it more as like a Russian patriotic or a Russian nationalist banner. You shouldn't read into it like communism or left-wing politics. That is not the connotations that this flag has anymore. In the same vein that Ukrainian Nazis don't really, yeah, some of them are anti-Semites, but whenever the Russians talk about Nazis in Ukraine, they're not talking about the Holocaust or about this video is not getting monetized on YouTube, is it? Or about about anti-Semitism or stuff that we would consider and associate with Nazism in the West. It's that kind of duality. Things have different meanings in Eastern Europe and in the former USSR now. So, yeah, it is a Soviet flag, but do not read into it like pro-communism, far left. That is not the connotations to take away from this banner. So just that quick nuance aside. And this is another point that I raised a few weeks ago about as has happened across Kherson and Zaporozhe Oblasts, now has happened in Erindogar. The Ukrainian flags have disappeared from the civil administration buildings a couple weeks ago. Today, the flag of the Russian Federation was raised and flies alone over the city administration. So, just seen footage of that. I think we really need to go into too deep into that, but sure if I'd even need the raised rallies because it's kind of a moot point at this stage, isn't it? Well, I guess we'll write off Erindogar there. We will move on to Melitopol. Quickly address some of the issues there. Melitopol especially has been kind of the very early on, whenever it was taken, that's where I essentially, since the Russians have came into it, one thing I've been keeping an eye out across Ukraine is how the Russians administer the territories they've taken. That's kind of because I'm like a political autist person. I'm interested in how they govern, administer, and police the regions that they hold. Because the way they do that can tell you sort of how they have, what their ambitions, what their long-term plans in certain areas are. So, is the Melitopol stuff that I'm looking for. So that is why I've been keeping a close eye on this stuff, but especially in Melitopol, it is where the Russians very early on started to develop. It was kind of like the experiment of how the Russians would go forward with this stuff. So, for example, back on as early as the 15th of March, and even earlier than that, but here you go, the 15th of March in Melitopol, Russian flags are appearing across Melitopol, and it appears some segments of the population are becoming more accommodating to Russian soldiers and to aid. It should be said that the city has been the scene of significant demonstrations against Russia, but equally, large parts of the population have been depending on Russian military, quote, humanitarian aid, end quote, for survival since they took over. And then this is some footage of it. The Russian soldier handing, this is good optics for Russians, young toddler being handed a Russian army ration by a Russian soldier. That's kind of like the propagandist stream. Children happy with soldiers. The mother doesn't seem too concerned. So, and here, Russian flags have raised over, I think this might be the local Dom Kultura, or maybe a local theatre of some sort, local cinema. So, as you can see, the I Love Melitopol symbol there, the heart symbol there is still in Ukrainian national colours, but above that is the Russian tricolour has been erected. And if I go back to, just right down to the first time we started to mention Melitopol. So, yeah, so on the 26th of February, so the second day of the invasion, the Russians effectively took Melitopol largely without a fight. There was some fighting, skirmishes on the outskirts of the city, but the city really did not see much conflict to begin with. Pardon me. But very soon, what I'm looking for. Yep, so very shortly after the Russians established, this is 3 days after the Russians took control of the city, here is a line of people lining up for Russian food aid, for supplies given out by the Russian army. So the Russians very early, whenever they took control of the city, started to enact, I don't want to say enact plans, but they started to put together the nucleus of what is now happening across Kherson and Zaporozhe. Spoken about Melitopol a lot. Trying to find the specific. Not too sure if I should even raise the issue of rallies might touch on it for a degree because it's kind of a moot point now, largely relevant in the previous stream. But so here we go. On the 3rd of March, this post here, quote, humanitarian aid is being sent to the city. An alert from the Russian Federation Armed Forces in order to prevent provocations during the distribution of humanitarian aid. Russian servicemen are alerting the residents of Melitopol. What's happening here is there's a Russian, I believe it's a Tiger, I forget it. Russian military vehicle with a loudspeaker essentially telling the local population, go to the main square, we're handing out food. I don't speak Cyrillic, so if that's not exactly what is said, if someone in chat wants to correct me whenever I come to the questions, I'll be happy to. So that was that. Just to show you some footage of what is purported to have happened at it. Bear in mind, it's a lot of the stuff, especially showing humanitarian aid, does come from pro-Russian sources. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. But either way, it has built up into a narrative of stuff that does certainly appear to be happening. So if we look at this footage, so that's the Cyrillic there. The quotation there is, quote, whatever it is an act of humanism. Residents of Melitopol about humanitarian aid from Russia. I mean, and then I sort of cynically said, I mean, they wouldn't need the humanitarian aid if the Russians hadn't invaded in the first place. But either way, you don't tend to bite the hand that feeds you, no matter where it is. Well, so this is the Russian distribution of food aid. But pay attention. The Ukrainian national flag still is flying in the city, and this specific footage was from the 3rd of March. So the Russians have been in the city for 5 days. So in a square where the Ukrainian national flag is flying prominently, the Russians are handing out food.
Мнение. Мое мнение такое, что бы то ни было. Вы с Мелитополя?
But it should be said, I'm not too sure if I specifically can find the footage off the top of my head. That flag has since been removed and replaced by the Russian tricolour. So yes, just to sort of give you an idea of the extent of the humanitarian aid, this is footage of one of the trucks bringing it into Melitopol. And whenever I come across the footage, I'll play it. But this hasn't been universally accepted. There have been rallies and demonstrations against the Russians, and there's also been some of the demonstrators of those rallies have castigated, condemned and harassed locals who have gone and taken aid and food from the Russian soldiers. So it is by no means been a universally accepted development. So I guess this is prominent here. 4th of March, so still very early into the war. From Intel Slava, I don't know the source where Intel Slava got it from, but in Kherson, following Melitopol, Russian television channels began their broadcasting. So Russian TV started to be broadcasted into the region very early on. And just on the previous point, here you go. Protesters in Melitopol are hurling insults and castigating Ukrainians lining up to receive food and supply from Russian soldiers. People lining up for food. People castigating people taking food. It should be said that since then, these rallies, at least in Melitopol, have largely died out. For various reasons, maybe the Ukrainians taking an opportunity to leave. Maybe they just got to the stage where they were able to feed themselves. They had to take food from the Russians themselves. There's a number of reasons for it. But these rallies, at least in Melitopol, have largely subsided. Oh. Now, this was another incident that happened as well, round about that time in Zaporozhe. which Melitopol is part of Zaporozhe Oblast. Regional military administration officially confirms that the Russian army has... Oh, pardon me. Oh. You try to give a good quote and then you get a bit of gas. Pardon me. Apologies, chat. As always, ever the professional. So, the Zaporozhe Regional Military Administration officially confirms that the Russian army has seized a television tower in Melitopol, installed its equipment there, and started broadcasting Russian TV channels. So that happened there. As happened around about the 4th of March. This is just more footage of people quite an extensive line of Russian humanitarian aid. Let's look and... Yeah, I guess this is another point convenient to raise, is Russian internal troops. You have to understand that internal troops are separate from the Russian military. You're talking; these are things like the National Guard, the Rosguardia, the OMON, things like that. If I pronounce the OMON right, if it's even pronounced like that at all. These are troops who are effectively back in Russia. These are like gendarmes, if you imagine like the French militarized police. These are the people who deal with riots in places like the Caucasus. These are the people who largely deal with sort of Islamic insurgencies. Previously in Chechnya, till this day in places like Dagestan and to a degree in Ingushetia. These are like militarized police. They're not frontline soldiers. They're policing troops, very well armed and very militarized policing troops, but they were deployed into Ukraine quite early on.
Вон такая колонна едет сейчас в Мелитополь. Чисто пропагандисты.
So two aspects to take there. Maybe that is now in hindsight, maybe this is the Russians thinking we can try and customize the local population to the concept of policing by Russian internal troops. But also it frees up Russian soldiers, frontline soldiers, for operations elsewhere in Ukraine, especially at this time whenever the Russians were trying to be on the advance and keep on the advance. So, look. So just another point just worth raising. I guess it's more sure how to raise it, but yeah. Whenever the Russians have taken Melitopol, it has been quite a sedate city center. You can see this person's out walking their dog, and then they come across a burned, destroyed Ukrainian BTR phone. So, I mean, the fact that someone's doing that they're able to freely walk their dog in the city just days ago was an active battlefield. Little side point. Pardon me. Find the specific points about the mayor, and we'll jump in. Wrap up one. Oh yeah, this is another interesting incident that's been happening specifically in Melitopol, but has expanded a bit more. So, yeah, the Russian military has been holding various buyback schemes for weaponry in the region. So, weapons that were purported to have been handed out to the territorial defense, the civilian militia that Ukraine tried to raise in the region just after the invasion. The Russians, in some estimates I've seen, offered to buy back each rifle, each hand firearm that was handed in for around about $500 US. Interesting that they seem to have offered it in US dollars, but yeah, the Russians have been operating quite extensively to try and, I wouldn't say disarm, but, you know, try and take firearms out of the local population. Just on the point, if you just remember back to what I was saying about that petrol station, the Russians were very, very keen. So 9th of March, this would have been 12 days after the Russians took control. They were trying to re-establish local commerce. So here's just some images of the local marketplace. I think this is a Nitka. I think that's like a local apothecary. Apothecary is what's what's the terming? Pharmacy, local pharmacies reopened, local sweet shop here. So the Russians were very keen to try and get local commerce restarted in the area for a number of various reasons. I'll just cycle through these photos while we look at them. There's poultry, butchers, stuff like that. So if you notice, a lot of this, some of this, as you can see there, the Russians were very keen to try and get the locals back into restarting some kind of local economy for a number of reasons. One, if local people are working, if they're earning money, they're not idle. Idle hands are the devil's plaything, as the saying goes. People who have nothing to do, they grow resentful. Obviously, if the Russians are there, they're not, the way the Russians entered the region, it's not exactly endeared them to a lot of these people. So if people are idle, they could easily start to cause mischief in various forms of severity to the Russians. Whereas if they're working, if they're earning money to feed themselves, to put money into their family, to keep their family afloat through these trying times, they're busy, they're occupied, their minds are not left to wander to potentially dangerous things for the Russians. But also, is another point which I might come across later on, is that if the local farmers as well, if local industry is working, local agriculture, they can start to produce produce themselves, they can sell it themselves in the local area. That reduces the burden on the Russian army, the Russian state, to provide humanitarian aid, quote unquote, to feed, to support the local population. So it's just numerous ways why it's good for the Russians to try and get the local population back into economic and commercial activity. Reduces the cost of the occupation, transition, however you want to call it, for the Russians. This. And the interesting point I've been trying to build up to is specifically about the mayor and the local administration. So here on the 12th of March, the mayor of Melitopol, Ivan Fedorov, who was kidnapped, who was kidnapped on the 11th of March, is alive, but the Russians are torturing him, President Zelensky said. So what was that about? The local mayor of the city, he was detained by the Russians because he was actively encouraging the anti-Russian demonstrations against the troops. So the Russians detained him. The Ukrainians alleged that he was tortured. Looking at the video after, whenever he returned to Ukrainian control, he didn't really look to be that badly done. So, yeah. But in his stead, whenever Ivan Fedorov was replaced, they replaced him with Galina Dalinchenko. Galina was elected onto the local city council as part of the opposition platform for life. For people who are not aware, the opposition platform for life was, I guess it was now because it's been banned, was a political party in Ukraine, widely viewed as the successor to the Party of Regions. Party of Regions was the party of the previous president, Viktor Yanukovych, widely considered to be pro-Russian, Russophone, Russophile. If not that strong, it believed that Russia and Ukraine should have better relations. So the successor party, the opposition platform for life, kind of absorbed the remains of the Party of Regions as the sort of de facto more pro-Russian party in Ukraine. Galina here was elected onto the city council as part of that party. The Russians installed her as the local mayor. Without going too deep into what's happened to the opposition platform since then, various members, MPs, members of the Verkhovna Rada, who were members of the party, have been arrested by the Ukrainian state, the Ukrainian Secret Service, on various charges of high treason, actively aiding and abetting the Russian invasion, for trying to actively surrender towns without a fight to the Russians. And that culminated a couple weeks ago whenever President Zelensky and the Ukrainian state effectively banned pretty much, I don't want to say multi-party democracy, but any party that was not considered anti-Russian enough was effectively banned across Ukraine. So the opposition platform is now, I believe it's now a de facto illegal organization in Ukraine. That's I might be wrong on that point, but either way, the party's been banned. it's been used is pilloried as sort of like a fifth column in the rest of Ukraine. So Galina here didn't help that case whenever it came about. And if this is footage of Galina herself, no. But we had some footage. Yeah, you can't scroll up too much. If I'm going to try and put this YouTube video, certain. Mayor. Installed a new mayor. That's the one I've just. Pardon me. Where's the video of Galina? We did have a video of Galina somewhere. I think this might be it here, just so you have an idea of who we are talking to. Yes, here you go. So this is the ever lovely Galina Dalinchenko. Ever since this has happened, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, the Ukrainian state prosecutor has opened several criminal charges against her on the accounts of treason of various degrees against her for this. So, as you can see, this is Galina here. If I'm not mistaken, if I remember the caption correctly, she's just said that the population is hoping we might have been able to have gotten a view to see if that big Ukrainian flag and that rally was still there on the 14th, whenever that footage was released. Guess why we are on Galina. We'll just wrap up on her because that is the point I am trying to make. Go back to Melitopol. So here we go. This is a bit more recent, but around about the 31st of March. Ukrainian flags have been removed and replaced with Russian ones in Melitopol Rayon. Rayon, if I'm pronouncing that right, Rayon. It's a administrative unit in Ukraine and in Russia. It's like the administrative division below an oblast. I guess in British parlance, sort of considered like a not a county council, but maybe like a local council area, something like that. So this is spread out not just in the city itself, but into the surrounding area in the country. As you can see there, the Ukrainian state emblem still remains. Probably has since been taken down, but this is the local administration building, and the Russian tricolor now flies in place of the Ukrainian banner. There is a very specific footage that I am looking for that. So yeah, this is the other point is, again, correctly, I think some people might have done in the previous shit stream, but this footage here, because I don't speak Russian, so I can't confirm personally, but from my understanding, what this footage is showing is, and illustrating is the gentleman who's interviewed in it is that locals from Melitopol are actively being recruited by the Russians, by the new local administration to fill out sort of basic civil administration tasks, maybe to fill out the position of sort of like a quasi-militia. If not a local himself, he's a Russian. That's what they're trying to do.
Куда обращаться, кто захочет убить народной милиции?
В каждой области есть военкоматы, полиция в данном случае уже, сотрудникам правоохранительных органов.
It's just him speaking for language I don't speak.
Победа! Россия!
So, like I say, Melitopol seems to have been where a lot of this stuff was test fired before it was expanded on out across wider Kherson and Zaporozhe Oblast. Just find this. And show that because that is things that would get me in trouble on a video. So, no, I cannot. Video of torture. So I guess this will expand as I move off of Melitopol. Is Russian flags are now flying over Kherson, Melitopol, Berdyansk, Kakhovka, Nukakovka, Balakay, and others in the Turaid province of Kherson region. For people who are not aware, back in the imperial days, sort of in the 1800s, is Kherson and Crimea, what is now Kherson and Crimea, were united into a sort of one massive province known as the Turaid. And that's what this is referring to. Turaid, the province, if I'm pronouncing that right, Turaid of Kherson Oblast region, military and civil administrations are being created. And then there's me just making a note to do this stream. Previous stream that didn't go so well. But the point there is that the Ukrainian flags have been disappearing, Russian flags have been going up. To that. But then this is another interesting thing, which I think I might do a quick spiel on as well, is for people who are not sort of aware, and maybe some Ukrainians, if I've gotten this completely off base, can sort of vouch for it myself, but obviously Ukrainian statehood, that is the notion that Ukraine is a nation state, not the Ukrainian nation, which has been in existence for hundreds of years. But the idea that Ukraine is an independent nation state is contested because, for various reasons, whenever the Kievan Rus was destroyed by the Mongols, most of what became Ukraine was then held by the Poles, then by the Lithuanians, then by the Austro-Hungarians, and then by the Russians. There is never really that sort of sustainable, independent Ukrainian state. One of the counter-arguments to that is that the Cossacks, the Cossack Siches and the Hosts were that Ukrainian statehood historically. That's contested because in the modern era there are still some Cossacks in Ukraine, but the vast majority of Cossacks, from my understanding, people who outrightly identified themselves as Cossack, they have since migrated historically into Russia, into an area around the Don, in the Kuban region, which is, just to give you an idea of where we are talking about. So, this area called Zaporozhe, this is very famous historically for its Cossacks. So just to give you a very quick historical rundown, whenever the Ottoman Empire, around about the 15th, 16th century, they had a client state here. This was known as the Tatars. They were the legacy of the Mongols to a degree. They were Muslims. They often held slaving raids, slaving parties up into Russia, into this area, into Ukraine, to bring back slaves to then sell them into the Ottomans. And so this was an Ottoman client state. Because of these slaving raids, obviously the people, the Orthodox Slavic Christians in this area didn't really want to just take this line down. Some of them militarized themselves, and that's kind of where the Cossacks come from. Because this is, in the way in Western Europe, if you know what a march is, it's like a militarized border. So for an example, this is going to expand away off into different things, but this area between Scotland and England is known as the Marches. There's also down here in Wales, this is known as the Marches as well. So historically, in the medieval ages, obviously England and Scotland often fought many wars. Because this border area was constantly at combat, it had to be militarized. It became what is historically known as a march. Austria in German is known as Österreich, but originally it was sort of known as Ostmark. Mark is the German word for march. That's where Brandenburg and all that stuff. So a march is a historical medieval phenomenon. That's kind of what happened in Ukraine. That's kind of why it was called the borderlands. Ukraine, i.e. the borderlands, because this was the borderlands between Great Russia, the Slavic peoples, and then this was the borderland between Russia, Catholic Europe, the heretics of Catholic Europe, and then the infidels, the slaving parties of the Muslim world that came up from Crimea and from the Ottoman Empire. So that's why Ukraine is known as the borderlands. And then also some of these people then militarized themselves, as I've said, into sort of like a militarized society. That's where the Cossacks come from. So historically, the Cossacks do come from what is now in Ukraine, especially in the Zaporozhe area. There's a very famous historical letter called the Letter of the Zaporozhian Sich to the Ottoman Emperor, that's extant in history. So Zaporozhe, especially, I actually think on its oblastal, the state flag, it actually has Cossacks. So yeah, Cossacks originate in what is now Ukraine. There are still some Cossacks there to my understanding, but the vast majority of Cossacks have since settled in this region here of Russia. This is the Don and the Kuban area. And Cossacks in the modern era are very, very Russian nationalist. I don't know if you could describe them as their own separate ethnicity, because racially they are Russian and Ukrainian. They're not like a different race as such. They just have a different, I don't want to say they're like gypsies, but they split off. Whenever I'm talking about gypsies, I'm talking about Irish gypsies, pikeys. For people who aren't aware, apart from Roma gypsies, there are Irish gypsies, and around about the 1600s, they kind of diverged from the wider Irish society whenever they just became nomadic. That's kind of what the Cossacks came, but obviously the Cossacks they don't steal everything under the sun and cause problems wherever they go. But that's kind of the society they have. They're kind of semi-nomadic. It's a very militarized society. They live in things called sitches and hosts. Most of them are in Russia, and they've kept this military legacy to them to this day, where I believe there are still Cossack regiments within the Russian military, but on their own civil administration basis is their own like communities are organized in this quasi-military line. And in 2014, large numbers of Cossacks came to fight for the Donetsk and Lugansk republics. If you search Cossack in the channel, every time I've seen a Cossack in some footage, I've made a note of it, because it is noteworthy. But also why I'm doing this big spiel on Cossacks is this post that came out today. So this is the post in Cyrillic, and this is a Cossack because he's wearing that Cossack hat. They wear a very particular type of hat. Yeah, I think that's the state emblem of Zaporozhe. So that is a Cossack on the emblem. But what is the quotation of the Cyrillic? Zaporozhe is Cossack land. Held a working meeting with the Cossack Colonel Sergei Yurchenko, the head of the Zaporozhe Cossack district. He reported on the work of Cossack squads to protect public order in the quote-unquote liberated territories of Zaporozhe region. Let me remind you that the Melitopol Cossack Squad for the Protection of Public Order works at the address Sevchenko Recreation Center, first floor, yada yada yada. We agreed that in addition to protecting public order, the Cossack Squad will take over the provision of targeted humanitarian assistance. The squad invites to its ranks all those who are ready and willing to take part in the protection of public order in the city and in the district. So, let me have a quick look. Is this because from my understanding is the Russian flag as well this is a local Cossack. So this is a person who has lived in Ukraine. His family is in Ukraine. They live in Zaporozhe, maybe not the city itself, but in the Oblast. But he, for whatever reasons, is this Cossack, and from what this post is saying, is the local Cossack community, because remember what I just said is like local Cossack communities, they're like quasi-military structures. They're quasi-separate from the surrounding society. In the Russian census, at least from my understanding, is you have to self-declare as a Cossack. and local Cossack hosts. That's what a Cossack community is called, a host. They're actually recognized by both the Russian and Ukrainian state. So, and you know, the way in sort of like Britain or in other Western countries, you can sort of self-declare your own ethnicity, what ethnicity you feel you're a part of to a degree. That's what the Cossacks can do, and there's different Cossack hosts, and they have state recognition. But it seems from this post, it seems to imply that the local host in Zaporozhe seems to have come out on the side of Russia, and that they're actively working for the Russians in the enforcement of law and order in Zaporozhe Oblast, which goes back to what I was saying, is that there are Cossacks who still live in Ukraine, but the vast majority of Cossacks today live in Russia, and historically they have a very strong military tradition in Russia, dating back to the imperial period, and then into the Soviet era, although after World War II they were decimated by the Soviet Union. But either way, especially post the collapse of the USSR, because the Soviet Union kind of tried to de-Cossackize the Cossacks. Once the USSR collapsed, there was a new flourishing of Cossack identity in culture, and it's flourished under Russia. So Cossacks in Russia are very happy. They feel very accommodated by the Russians. I'm not too sure specifically what the situation is like in Ukraine, but granted, this is just one example. But as you can see, this Cossack gentleman, who seems to be from Zaporozhe, he is wearing a badge that has a Russian emblem and Russia written on it, and this is the state emblem for Zaporozhe Oblast. So if I just bring that up, and just to make sure I am not talking complete Zaporozhe Oblast. Yeah, so here you can see that's the that's the emblem of the Cossack there. So this is like the 15th, 16th century stereotypical image of the Cossack. There he is with his musket, which he would use to fight against the Tatars and the Ottomans, who would come up on slaving raids into Ukraine and into Russia. So just if you're interested in that history, this is the region where the Cossacks emerged from, and this is the connotations of why I particularly am interested in what's happening with the Cossacks and where they're lining now. So there are Cossacks who have come from Russia itself, not part of the Russian army. They're kind of in the same way that the Chechens are operating. You know, Ramzan Kadyrov has sent Chechen fighters up from Chechnya to fight in Melitopol, in alliance with the Russian army, but not commanded by the Russian army. From my understanding, is there are a bunch of Cossack regiments that are doing the same sort of thing in Ukraine. They're fighting with the Russian army, but they're not seconded to the Russian army. So that's the issue on the Cossacks. So Cossacks, local Cossacks, and potentially Cossacks coming in from Russia are also building up the local policing apparatus in Zaporozhe Oblast, which then builds and feeds into the idea that the Russians might have announced a referendum in Kherson Oblast, but it does look like the Russians are also minded to have a bit more of a long-term interest in this part of Zaporozhe Oblast. Wherever they end up taking the city of Zaporozhe itself is another issue, but certainly they are keen to potentially retain this land bridge to Crimea for various reasons. And also the other aspect as well, why... actually, I'll come into that whenever I start to wrap up. I'll not delve too much into that now. But yeah, so it'll be interesting to see just how extent this referendum that the Russians hold, because the Russians don't really hold all this area up here. So how exactly... The referendum is not going to be free and fair. It cannot be considered legitimate. Can't hold a referendum in the middle of a war whenever a lot of people who would have voted one way in that referendum have physically left. And also, I don't see how anyone can reasonably consider it legitimate. I mean, I know a lot of people in my chat will be like, yeah, the Russians should just annex this and that and be done with it. That's okay, that's your point of view. But I mean, the pretenses of the referendum are kind of mute. But either way, I guess the Russians have form here whenever they come to those sort of quasi-referendums. But conscious I tend to meander on random and autistic historical and political things long enough, so we will just quickly jump into and cover the events specifically in Kherson itself and what has been happening in the city. Oh, yeah, this is a quote, a prescient quote from Mikhail Saakashvili. For people who are not aware, Mikhail Saakashvili was the president of Georgia, who, depending on your point of view, he started the 2008 Georgian war. From my point of view, at least, I kind of believe that he largely did, because he sent his forces into South Ossetia, this breakaway region here, which is now itself talking about holding a referendum for accession to Russia. But Mikhail Saakashvili was the president of Georgia in the 2008 Georgian war, lost that war quite heavily. I believe he then became foul of a corruption scandal, fled Georgia, tried to model himself as like this neoliberal, anti-Russian figure internationally, lost his Georgian citizenship, came to Ukraine post-2008, 2014, whenever Ukraine went anti-Russian, acquired Ukrainian citizenship, became the governor of Odessa Oblast. I'm not too sure of specifically the politics of what happened, but either way, he cocked that up and got arrested and became disgraced a part of that. Essentially, Mikhail Saakashvili is this person who just seems a very interesting life of ascending to the heights of society, completely cocking it up and falling out of grace of the heights of that society, then going to another country, reinventing himself, and then getting back to the heights of society, then falling out of it. He's been rebuilding himself again in Ukraine since the invasion, because obviously every anti-Russian voice in Ukraine carries a lot of political capital these days. But this is what he said a week ago. So, pardon me. So this is the source for it. This is the big major pro-Ukrainian channel that I follow. So this is the Cyrillic written point of it. So if that's where you want to know where the source comes from, and this is the translation of it. Just my own personal spiel, because I personally don't rate Saakashvili very highly, but I never thought I would agree with this corrupt neoliberal klepto whore Saakashvili, but I think this is going to happen, at least in Zaporozhe Oblast as well. But quote, this is the specific quote from Saakashvili. I don't know if Ukraine or the West have realized just what the Russians are doing and are building in Kherson and in Zaporozhe Oblasts. I also noticed Google and Wikipedia have I didn't completely post the entire quote there. That was a bit awkward. Forgive me, chat. I will. I only posted the first part of that quote. Okay, yeah, I didn't post the full quote. Did I even post a quote at all? Oh no, okay, I've gotten the posts the wrong way around. Okay, so this is the quote from Saakashvili. By May, June, he, i.e. Putin, is going to seize Lugansk and Donetsk regions, oblasts, within their administrative borders, consolidate the corridor to Crimea and control over Kherson region, hold a referendum and announce the annexation by Russia of 4 new lands, Lugansk, Donetsk, Kherson regions, and South Ossetia. South Ossetia being this part of Georgia. To make them into the Russian Federation and declare that the issue is closed in the same way as Crimea. Mikhail Saakashvili. So what is he saying there? Well, essentially that has come to pass. So he said that, when was that posted? That was posted the 4th of April. So just coming up to 2 weeks ago is whenever he said that. So he is saying that essentially the Russians are going to annex these areas here. South Ossetia has announced that it is going to hold its own referendum for accession to Russia. But also, the interesting point to make out of this, and this is a point I've been making the past few days, the issue is closed. I've been using the term fait accompli a lot, and that's what I think is the way the Russians are doing. What is a fait accompli? A fait accompli is French, and essentially it means the facts on the ground. So whenever he's talking about Crimea, the Russians took over Crimea the facts on the ground in 2014 was the Russians held control over the region. Legally, diplomatically, however you can spin it, diplomatically, Crimea is part of Ukraine. Legally, under Ukrainian law, Crimea is part of Ukraine. Well, ultimately, that doesn't matter because the facts on the ground is that the Russians own Crimea in 2014 and they are enacting their will and administer the territory. So that is what he's saying there. The facts on the ground, the fait accompli. So why is the big offensive going to happen in the Donbass? Because once the Russians, and if they do manage to achieve their aims here, once they fully control the Donbass, if Ukraine holds out in the negotiations about the territory, it's a fate. The facts on the ground already reflect the reality. So in terms of the wider negotiation strategy, Zelensky's effectively already written out NATO membership. Ukraine will not be a member of NATO, and Zelensky has said that. So the Russians have achieved that. There was some interesting movement a couple of weeks ago, although Zelensky in recent days has walked that back. But he made some interesting comments about saying there can be a discussion held over Crimea because the facts on the ground in Crimea are the facts on the ground. Ukraine, almost certainly, bar the complete collapse of Russia, somehow will never regain control over Crimea. But he refused to budge on Donbass because the Ukrainian army still holds a fair chunk of Donbass. It's still in contention. So if the Russians completely control the Donbass, that's whenever in the Russian mind, maybe that's whenever Zelensky and Kiev are going to start realizing, look, we can try and protest this as much as we want, but unfortunately the facts on the ground are the facts on the ground. Legally, diplomatically, it might reflect otherwise, but if all the towns in the region have Russian soldiers in them and there's Russian flags flying over all the local administration buildings, we don't exercise control over that area. It is lost to us. So what Mikhail Saakashvili is saying is once they establish full control over the Donbass, well, the Russians already control most of Kherson Oblast. So this leads back into what I was saying at the start. The Russians are in the long war. They've lost more men, lost more material, and lost more treasure over this than they expected. So they want more compensation out of this. How are they going to get that compensation? We want more land. We're going to be looking at taking Kherson, maybe Zaporozhe, maybe hypothetically, if it goes far enough, we'll take Kharkov as well. Some people think Nikolaev in Odessa. I'll have to wait and see if the Russians decide to go that far. But that is the assessment I think the Russians are making. We have paid enough. We have paid more than we expected, and we're paying too much as it is. We're going to up our demands. You're going to accept our Crimea. You're going to give us the Donbass, and also now you're going to give us Kherson and potentially Zaporozhe. And what are you going to do about it? We already control those territories. We've held hypothetically, we've held a referendum. It's already gone. It's now its own independent republic. It's not part of Ukraine anymore. These are the facts on the ground. You might as well deal with them. And if you don't accept the demands now, we'll keep pressing this war because we're in it for a penny in the pound now. The Russians are mobilizing their economy. They're starting to mobilize their reserves. The Russians really are. They are in this to win this. They will fight this as far as it needs to go. So with that in mind, if Ukraine loses the Donbass and the Russian army is spilling out of here, the Russians will just start to say to Kiev and Zelensky, you've lost the Donbass, you've lost Kherson, you've lost Zaporozhe. Do you really want to go further and lose Kharkov as well? Do you really want to keep fighting this war after that? Maybe we'll decide we're going to try and take off Nikolaev and Odessa. Do you really want to become a landlocked state? Do you want Ukraine to be this rump state and to lose its entire coastline? Are we going to have to go forward and completely unite Novorossiya, Malorossiya? Is that that's where I think the Russian negotiating strategy is starting to build in the direction of. That is kind of the central premise of what I've thinking things are going into, and the events in Kherson today with the announcement of this referendum, I think largely back up my premise on that. So let's have a look if we can find a few examples of events actually in Kherson itself. But yeah, I guess because I haven't really touched on it, it should be said that there are anti-Russian rallies still holding on in Kherson. They're not as large as they were in the beginning, but there still is demonstrations on a daily basis in Kherson against the Russian soldiers in the city. But look here, we'll just show you a couple of examples. Russian flags raised in Kherson and in Novokhovka. Novokhovka, I think that is here. So that's where we're talking about here. As you can see, this is a fairly sizable city. This is the hydroelectric plant on the Dnieper. So obviously that has strategic implications for Russia long term. Also, that is why Erindogar has implications for Russia long term. You know, if you can nab the largest energy supplier for Ukraine, you hold a lot of influence over Ukraine, because from my understanding is a lot of the lights and electricity that's still on in central Ukraine is only still on because the Russians are allowing the energy grid to continue working upstream. So that's something you have to bear in mind as well, is the areas that Russia have taken, very significant part of Ukrainian electricity supply. As I was saying, largest nuclear power plant in Europe. This thermal power plant here, again, I think it's gas-fired, but also this hydroelectric plant here, which I believe it might also be a dam that controls the Dnieper upstream. So very significant energy and infrastructure. It could potentially pass into permanent Russian control if the Russians do indeed go forward with what they're doing in Zaporozhe and in Kherson. In fact, no, bring that up now. Use that as something towards the end. This was another interesting post, just to kind of feed back in, is if this post is indeed accurate, so here is the Cyrillic, here's the photos of it, but if this post is indeed accurate, because there was some things I pointed out in the last stream that seemed a bit off, but the translation of that, quote, Ukrainian farmers have started supplying vegetables to markets in Crimea. The first batch was delivered today, on the 2nd of April 2022, to Privoz in Simferopol from Zaporozhe region. Prices are lower than the Crimean ones. Soon, on a regular basis, they will begin to carry out the entire borscht set from Kherson to Crimea. Local merchants scratch their heads. It seems that someone this season will have to remember the principles of working in a competitive market environment. So what's that saying is Ukrainian farmers operating in this area here are now producing food and goods to such an extent that they have now been able to export it into Crimea. So bear in mind what I was saying earlier about agriculture in Crimea. It's largely hurting because of the water situation. So there's been a bit of a glut in the ability of agricultural produce. So Ukrainian farmers up here, interesting that the Russians have allowed this commerce to begin, which feeds into the idea that the Russians are looking to integrate these areas into Russia and extract them from Ukraine. But if Ukrainian agricultural goods are now flowing into Crimea, helps lower the food costs in Crimea, good domestic politics in a region of Russia that has been plagued economically because of sanctions since 2014 and the water crisis. But also, that is money that's going to go from Crimea, pay for local Ukrainian farmers here. That's going to keep them busy. It's going to keep them in work. One, it's going to keep the farms running. So a lot has been made of the coming agricultural crisis and shortage because of the war in Russia and the sanctions against Russia and the war in Ukraine. Another aspect, just while I am on it, is we will bring up a very specific term, Chernozem. Chernozem is so just before I get into explaining it, this is all steppe. This is the Eurasian steppe that stretches from the borders of Transylvania in Romania and against Hungary, Transcarpathia, and stretches all the way into Kazakhstan, all the way up against the borders of China. This is all steppe. Obviously, some parts of this steppe are more agriculturally productive than other, and the most agricultural productive parts of it, as you can see, this satellite reflects it, is the green areas. And this is this area here. This is where all the sunflower is grown. This is where a lot of the agricultural produce that they've been increasing a lot in prices because of the war are grown. And why is it so fertile? As you can see, look at all this industrial agriculture going on here, the circle plantations. It's because the ground, the soil in this area is what is known as Chernozem. That is the Russian term for it. Chernozem is black soil, which I know it's Wikipedia, but it's useful for this as well. Just having a quick look at this map. Well, not big enough, but as you can see, this red area that shows where the Chernozem is present stretches all the way into this part of Ukraine, into southern Ukraine. So the other way to look at what the Russians are doing here, the big infrastructural projects aside, is economically they are looking to seriously damage Ukraine going forward, to make Ukraine a more dependent power. Potentially, they're looking to make Ukraine dependent on Russia economically. Because just to give you a quick idea of that Ukrainian farmer post helps lead into this is look at the regions that Ukraine has lost since 2014. Hyper-productive agricultural land in Crimea, which also includes the vineyards, that's gone. This was also a big tourist sector. A lot of tourists from Russia came here, still do go here, but back whenever it was part of Ukraine, it was a big boost for Ukrainian state budget because of the tourist income. Also, they leased the naval base to Russia. Whenever the Donbass left, the Donbass was, I think I might have done it in a previous stream, but we always had a bit of trouble trying to find it. But just so you guys can actually have a physical idea of, work with us, work with me, Google, work with me. Work with me. Okay, this is perfect for what we need. Look at this countryside. It is flat. Completely flat as the eye can see, apart from buildings. This is European steppe land. Like I say, goes all the way to, if you follow us all the way across the Volga, across Astrakhan into Kazakhstan, you'll come up against the Altai Mountains on the border of China. And then in the opposite direction, in that way, if you go far enough, you will then get to Romania in the Carpathian Mountains. This is steppe. But what are these hills? This isn't steppe. What are these hills? These are slag deposits because this is hyper-productive coal territory. There's massive coal mines in this area. Hence why there's a lot of industry is extant through, you can see there. Obviously, this area is now a battle zone. I think that might be Rubizhny at the moment. But this mountain that this is taken from, these mountains on the edges here, these are slag deposits. This is runoff from coal mines. So why am I specifically talking about this? Because whenever Ukraine lost these parts of the Donbass in these areas, this is the major coal producing area of Ukraine. Whenever this left Ukraine, Ukraine went from an exporter of coal to having to import coal, which is obviously a massive economic hit for Ukraine. Not very good. Also, this is the most industrialized part of Ukraine. If we just have a quick look, let's just hope. Where is the industrial city? So, yeah, here's a big industrial works. If this is, well, yeah, this must still be working if there's smoke coming out of it, because this would have been taken post the war. But all industrial cities, all Soviet era heavy industry, because the coal resources were near here. This is also why Mariupol has the big steel foundries of Avostol and Ilyich, because this is coal country. Coal is an essential product into the production of steel. So two big steel foundries here. I think there's more steel foundries in Donetsk. So whenever this area has left Ukraine in 2014, and now especially if Ukraine completely loses this, Ukraine loses its coal, loses a lot of its heavy industry. They already lost the agricultural productive region of Crimea. If they lose Zaporozhe and Kherson, Ukraine being I believe it's the world's largest producer of sunflower, that's going to go as well. That will now go to Russian control, and that will be another massive hit to the Ukrainian economic viability. That's not to say that the rest of Ukraine isn't economically viable, It almost certainly is, but you have to understand, like, this is the most fertile territory in Ukraine. This is where the big farms work. This is where all the sunflower, all the wheat that is grown for export, most of that, large sections of that come out of this territory now. So if that goes to Russia, well, one, that increases Russian dominance over those markets. We're feeling it now, but whenever it comes to harvest season next year, whenever it comes to buying cereal goods next year, if the sanctions are still in place where Russian cereal goods don't start to enter Western markets, that's whenever we're really going to start to feel the pinch on the prices of foodstuffs that come from cereals. So if the Russians do end up taking this area, the Russian dominance of that market increases even more. So that's the other aspect of it, is the Russians are looking to significantly cripple Ukraine economically going forward. Because the other big aspect to look at is Ukraine was also a major arms manufacturer. The tank works in Kharkov. Let's see if we can just handedly bumble into it. If I should have looked this up earlier, so I had an idea of where I'm looking. This looks like the industrial center. I think it might be somewhere in here. But the reason why, if people have wondered why does Russia use T-72s, but Ukraine is using T-64s, it's because the T-72 in the Soviet era was made in, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of the works, but it's produced in a city away out by the Urals. The T-62 was made in Soviet tank factory in Kharkov. So whenever the USSR broke apart, the parts to maintain and build new T-72s were in Russia. The parts to maintain and build new T-64s then became part of Ukraine. So that's why Ukraine stuck with the T-64 and why Russia's modernized the T-72 and T-90 variants. That factory has been effectively completely destroyed. The Russians have leveled it numerous times. Why is that significant? Well, one, obviously Ukraine isn't going to be able to make tanks, but economically, Iraq especially, lots of African countries, I believe South Korea at one stage, Malaysia, whenever they were looking to buy tanks or to upgrade their tank fleets, is they would go to Russia or they could go to Ukraine. The Ukrainians usually did it cheaper. Usually not as good as to what the Russians would do, but they could modernize the tanks to a certain level and they would do it cheaper. So that was a big boon to the Ukrainian state budget, is that tank factory. Well, that tank factory has been completely destroyed. That was built in the Soviet era, whenever capital didn't really matter to the extent it does now. To rebuild that factory would be very expensive. So that is a legacy from the USSR that now Ukraine has lost. On top of that, Antonov, if we go back to Hostomel, the Antonov works here have been destroyed in the Battle of Hostomel. And then also the other Antonov actual manufacturing facility here, that's been bombed a few times by the Russians. Antonov, again, the same with the tanks. Whenever various countries across the world were looking to modernize their MiGs, their Soviet-era aircraft, they could go to Russia. Russia usually did it more expensive, and there's certain political influence that Russia demands from doing that. Or they could go to Ukraine, they could go to the Antonov works to do it. So that was another big income for the Ukrainian state budget, was the modernization of aircraft through the Antonov works, while Hostomel's been effectively completely destroyed. So you're not going to, the viability of Ukraine to do the strategic lift through their heavy aircraft, that's been diminished. But now they're not going to be able to bring in, hypothetically, Iraqi MiGs or Algerian aircraft are not going to be able to come to Ukraine, to this factory anymore, to be modernized, because this factory's been largely destroyed. That's another aspect taken out of the Ukrainian economic budget. So yeah, these do have relevant military strategic interests during a war, the active war with Russia, but you also have to look beyond why is Russia making a big, beyond just denying the ability of Ukraine to make this stuff while it is at war. In the long term, the Russians are looking to just completely destroy the Ukrainian armaments industry. So I believe it might be in Dnieper, or maybe it's Kremenchuk. In one of these two cities, Ukraine also has a missile factory where they make military missiles. anti-tank guided missiles. Some, I believe that's where their Toshkas, they made Toshkas or upgraded their Toshka stocks, was in this missile factory. A couple of weeks ago, I posted some footage of Ukrainian troops using anti-tank guided missiles, but the missile monitors had Arabic writing on this, and people are saying, oh, this is fake, because why would Ukrainians be using Arabic script on their anti-tank guided missiles? No, that's because those anti-tank guided missiles were made in this factory in whatever city it is. I don't know if it's in Kremchuk or Dnieper, but the Ukrainians were making those anti-tank guided missiles for export to Middle Eastern buyers. But obviously, once you're at war with Russia, you're going to need every weapon you can get. So the stuff that they were going to export, they've just started using themselves. So that factory, I believe just the other day, that was bombed again. It's been bombed several times since then. That's the market for Ukrainian anti-tank missiles now taken out of. So that's another economic hit that the Ukrainians are going to take going forward. Kraz, the big Ukrainian truck manufacturer that makes armored vehicles and just in general their trucks, I believe that factory has been bombed once, but I don't think it was completely destroyed. But either way, if the Russians do take that out, the point, why am I yammering on about this? Because all this stuff it's leftovers from the USSR, is largely the infrastructure. Yes, some of it's been modernized, but this is the Soviet legacy bequeathed to Ukraine. The Ukraine has built up and is now used to carve a market for itself in international markets. So now that the Russians have largely destroyed this, it is very, very expensive to recreate that. Very expensive, probably especially in terms of the tank factory, prohibitively expensive for Ukraine to, unless the Americans, in whatever hypothetical future Ukrainian state that emerges from this war, is going to tell Ukraine, okay, we'll pay you money to rebuild your tank factory. I doubt that's going to be happening. If it gets that scenario, the Americans will be like, no, don't build your tank factory again. Buy our tanks instead. That's what I think the West would probably do. And also the Russians will do that. If Ukraine ends up as a Russian-aligned state, yeah, the Ukrainians will be forced to buy Russian equipment. But yeah, it is very noticeable, this economic war. We all hear about the sanctions and the economic war against Russia, but no, Russia is waging what appears to be quite an effective long-term economic campaign against Ukraine through the territory it's taken, and through just a complete dismantling of one of its most profitable industries, the arms industry and the aircraft manufacturing industry that it got from the USSR. So that is the other aspect of it. So the Ukrainian state is, if the Russians achieve what they want, which is the Western influence pushed out of Ukraine, Ukraine will become a dependent state on Russia economically, probably try and force it into the Eurasian Economic Union, tie Ukraine closely to Russia. I don't expect that that's really feasible for that scenario. So going the other way, if Ukraine does end up going fully into the West, this rump Ukrainian state, it is going to be a Ukrainian state that is going to be very dependent on Western aid for potentially its economic survival for a decade or so. So that could be two coins of where the Russians are looking at on this. So kind of got off a bit on a tangent there from a picture of onions. When we went from talking about Ukrainian farmers delivering, I think that's an onion or some kind of potato or something, delivering onions and potatoes to Crimea, into talking about the economic destruction of Ukraine. But yeah, so I'd like to imagine I'm quite good at these meandering autistic spiels. But yeah, so going back to that there, so again, to build up the narrative that the Russians are looking for long-term integration of this territory, the opening of agricultural markets into Crimea from this area, integrate the economies. I think we need these anymore. Do we need to look at Zaporozhe? I think we only needed it at that, didn't we? So let's have a look. Are there any other quick relevant points from Kherson that could be raised? Find the footage of, yeah, and then just quickly going back to the farmer issue. I've seen a few posts like this. So Cyrillic, Demining work continues on the Kherson Crimean border areas. Another post, I can't seem to find it immediately handy, was that the Russian military was specifically trying to return the demined land. So if we just look at some of the photos, they were looking to return this land back to agricultural production and over to Ukrainian farmers. So, look at these. Have a look. Tempted to try. So for people who are wondering what this is, from my understanding, if I've got this pegged right, is this fires out like an explosive string that fires out across the territory, like a explosive cord that detonates, and then will detonate any mines that's near it whenever it goes off. Footage of that. Kind of tempted maybe to see if we can just quickly pin down where exactly that might have been, because those wind turbines were quite distinctive. Look to be near coast. Did say somewhere down near Crimea, didn't it? It's on the Sea of Azov. Not quite, but either way, it's this sort of general territory here. I think we've found it. I think these are the wind turbines that we were just seeing. Oh. Problem about this part of Ukraine is it doesn't have a lot of full street views. Yeah, so there they are over there. So I'm thinking that those images were taken in this sort of general area going by the wind turbines alone. So this sort of territory here. Obviously, the Ukrainians mined it post 2014 with the expectation that the Russians at some point might launch an invasion, which they have. But the mines obviously haven't borne as much fruit as the Ukrainians were hoping they were. So, look, I think I might not be a few other stuff I would like to show, but I can't, and they're not immediately available to me. But it's just more examples of various instances of the removal of Ukrainian state symbols, Ukrainian flags. But there was a post way back in March sometime where someone talked about a possible referenda. I've just been trying to find that in the region. Can't seem to find it, but so I guess we will just quickly nip back to the flag. So again, in 2014, this came out on the internet. This is the flag that was aligned then for the Kherson People's Republic, which now seems to be coming into fruition. So it'd be interesting to see if this is indeed the flag that the Russians go with, because let's be honest, if you honestly think that this is going to be a fair referendum on the Russian parts, then I have a bridge in Crimea I want to sell you. But so the referendum, if it does indeed come to pass, it will almost certainly result in one way. And then the way that will go, well, I guess the next logical step will be what is the Russian looking to do? So the Russians are not looking to just outright annex this territory. That would be too, not verbose, what's the correct term? It would just be too much. The Russians just decide, okay, we are arbitrarily annexing Kherson into Russia for various reasons. Russia has few allies internationally, and the ones it still has, it wants to keep. So to arbitrarily start annexing parts of other countries would not go down very well, especially where the claim to potential Russian annexation is quite shaky. So, and also post 1945, the arbitrary annexation of territory is like a big geopolitical no. The only countries that have attempted that are Iraq and with Kuwait in 1991, and we all know how that ended. Russia with Crimea in 2014, and well, look at how that's ended, how it's ending now. The sanctions that came about, and Israel. But Israel is a special case for reasons I don't need to go into, but obviously the Golan Heights and parts of the West Bank. In terms of annexation, or like just unilateral annexation, Indonesia and Timor. But as you can see, Timor is now an independent state, so that didn't work out too well. I don't know if the reunification of Vietnam would really count, but essentially annexation of territory, unless it's done by agreed consent, is not really a dumb thing post 1945. It's kind of like one of the big red lines in international geopolitics. So it probably would still be a big red line for the Russians in this territory. Crimea was a special case. If the Russians did do it on a wider scale, say if the Russians invaded in the way they have now back in 2014, it could have been a very different result. The Russians probably legitimately would have been welcomed into a lot of this territory, but it's different now. So why the idea of the People's Republics? So it's kind of the way you have to look at why does the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republic exist? Well, one, the Russians couldn't really overtly fight the war, but also going forward, why is it unlikely, at least in my assessment, why is Donetsk and Lugansk, if the Russians really win the war to a significant degree, and potentially Kherson, why isn't Russia just going to immediately annex them? Because these are areas that are different. They've been part of Ukraine for various reasons. They have different legal standards, different economic patterns. It takes time to integrate them into Russia. So because of the diplomacy, the Russians couldn't really begin the integration process in the Donbass republics because of the geopolitical implications of it. But obviously that's now changed. So hypothetically, the Russians win the war. I don't need to go too far into it, but let's just say the Russians win the war, and as part of that, Kherson, Zaporozhe, Donetsk, and Lugansk are now broken off from Ukraine. So what happens then? Well, I would expect maybe the Russians will create just one big Kherson republic, or maybe they'll divide the part of Zaporozhe they control between Kherson and Donetsk, which leads me to another point that I'll point out once I finish this spiel, is so we have three hypothetical republics that emerge from the war. What the Russians then will probably do, they'll probably set on a timeline for about 10 years of we will slowly integrate these territories into Russia. We'll start to align their economics into Russia. They'll start to use the Russian ruble. We'll start to open up their markets and our markets into the wider Russian economy. We'll start to integrate their legal standards, bring them up to speed with the Russian norm. It will start to maybe subsume their military, their quasi-militaries into the Russian chain of command and is divisions within the Russian army. But also, particularly, whenever Lugansk and Donetsk achieve their territorial boundaries in this area, there is going to be a very large extent pro-Ukrainian population that is going to be very upset with this. There'll be some of them still in Donetsk and Lugansk, and the area is still held by Ukraine, but especially in this area. So in those 10 years, the Russians will have to try and make the case. I'm not saying there's going to be an insurgency, but there will definitely be a protest movement. People will not like it. There will be a significant part of the population that will rail against it. So the Russians will then decide, go down a process. Can we win these people over? Can we pump up the economies? Can we make them accept Russian rule? Can we try and do a Chechnya on them? And I'm not saying a Chechnya in the sense of completely destroy the country, but, turn former enemies into allies. That could be something that the Russians could do. But what they could also do, which the Russians are doing at the moment, is encourage these people to leave. So for people who are not aware, if I can just, I think it'll probably be mostly under refugees. Is the Russians have been doing some very interesting, interesting things with Ukrainian refugees in these territories. Have a quick drink. I will have a quick look, and every time I come across them, I will bring it up. But essentially what the Russians are doing in these territories is they are allowing people, for example, especially in Erendogar, people from Mariupol, people from Berdyansk, some from Kherson itself. If they want to go to Ukrainian-held territory, let them go to Ukrainian-held territory. Because the assessment there, those people are going to be the people who are not pro-Russian. They don't want to be under Russian occupation. They don't like the Russian army. If they want to go to Ukrainian territory, they especially, that kind of implies that they're not very keen on Russia. So if they leave of their own accord, if you let them go, good. In the Russian sense of the term, is, we are, I don't want to go back into my Maoist theory of warfare, but in terms of like potential insurgencies that people keep floating the idea of, the Maoist quote is that insurgents, the people, the rebels, the people's war, is that the insurgent must swim amongst the population like a fish swims in the sea. The people be in the sea, the fish be in the insurgent. So what's he saying like that? Well, the insurgent must be so in touch, so accommodate, so he must understand the local population to such an extent that the local population will allow him to move amongst it and freely operate within them. So the idea that the Russians are going for is, well, let's try and drain the sea a bit. The way they're doing that is allowing the people who might give succor to these people or might even become insurgents themselves to just leave of their own accord. So hypothetically, if this does go into some kind of quasi-pro-Russian republic, look at what happened post-2014 in Lugansk and Donetsk. People who were pro-Ukrainian left the rebel-held territory. Ethnic cleansing is too strong of a word. I need to actually sit down and find the word for it. But last night, a friend of mine said white flight, but it's not, I guess, Ukrainian flight, something like that. Well, essentially, pro-Ukrainians in Donetsk, Lugansk, and Crimea, they tended to go back to Ukraine post-2014. In Ukraine, to a degree, ethnic Russians and pro-Russians tended to go to Russia. So there was that kind of mutually agreed exchange of population. People freely chose of their own will to a degree. Maybe it might have been compelled, whatever. People left to the side that they wanted to. So that is the process that we could be seeing going on here, is the Russians are like, okay, if people want to leave, let them leave. We're not going to hold people here by their will, because if we do, they're going to cause trouble for us down the line. So, that will then mean that there could be a depopulation problem that could come up here. But either way, having too little people is probably better than having too many people, and people who are going to potentially take up arms against you or cause significant problems down the line. That could be an assessment that the Russians are making. So, like I say, ethnic cleansing is too strong of a word. Maybe the de-Ukrainianization. These territories are being de-Ukrainianized. Maybe that is a more appropriate term. So, that could be what is going on here. So if I can just try and find some actual refugee who passed into Russia. I can't find it immediately off the top of my head, forgive me, but they if you do look up refugee in the channel, there's quite a few posts for him, but it is a situation that has been ongoing. I look up in Erinduar. It's the place where this happens is Vasilivka. So between these two towns is kind of like a mutually agreed no man's land. So this bridge, there's Russian soldiers at this end of the bridge. Once you cross this bridge, you are in no man's land until you get to this town here where there are Ukrainian soldiers. So this is where the refugees pass through. This is also where prisoner exchanges are happening along this sort of mutually agreed highway here. So that, if you want to know where exactly that's happening, is in this area here. And I apologize, I can't immediately find you a video and footage of it to hand. It is out there somewhere in the channel. It's not immediately apparent to me. So, yeah. So, if the Russians do set up this Kherson People's Republic, the more Ukrainians who might cause problems that they can encourage to leave, the more viable that this will be for long-term Russian administration. So maybe if all goes well for the Russians in 5 to 10 years, maybe that's whenever the Russians will be like, okay, these regions are now stable enough, integrated enough to become federal subjects of the Russian Federation. So that could be an assessment that's made, because South Ossetia, just for an example, is most likely going to hold. Where is Tin Valley? Looking. There it is, Tin Valley. So this is Tin Valley, the capital of South Ossetia. As you can see, it is right on the border with Georgia. But it is almost certainly this South Ossetia is going to hold a referendum in the near future for accession to the Russian Federation. It became independent effectively at the end of the USSR. It's never really been controlled by Georgia, independent Georgia, post-Soviet Union. It's always kind of held de facto independent along with its sister republic here in Abkhazia. So you're talking coming up to just over 30 years, potentially, it's taken for these people to actually hypothetically enter Russia. If you're taking it on a more closer timeline, whenever the Russians recognized it since 2008, what was that, 10, 16 years, 14 years? So that could be the sort of generic timeline we're looking at. But then just on the South Ossetian thing, the only reason it's South Ossetia, because South Ossetia has a sister called North Ossetia, which is a republic of Russia. The ethnic makeup of people here are called Ossetians. They are their own distinct Caucasian group. They are natives of the Caucasus. But why is South Ossetia part of Georgia? This is Stalin. This is a Stalin-era border that Stalin made, because obviously Stalin was from Georgia. He looked to aggrandize Georgia. That's why he added various parts that probably shouldn't have been part of Georgia to Georgia. That's also why, on another aspect I spoke of, why Karabakh is unjustly part of Azerbaijan. This is all Stalinist ethnic tinkering. So at least here in the South Ossetian case, one of the Stalinist era border changes is going to be undone. So I think the borders of Ukraine, largely apart from Western Ukraine, which were established by Stalin, most of this was established by Lenin. But yeah, so it is interesting to see that the Western geopolitics it seems to be very strongly predicated to upholding the territorial borders established by Stalin through mass ethnic displaced deportations of various population groups. So that's another aspect of it. So ironically, Russia is actively, they claim, I know obviously it's a facetious point to make, but Russia accuses Ukraine of decommunization and destroying its legacy, but yet Russia is the one that is unwrapping and unraveling the Stalinist and Soviet era borders. So just an interesting historical tidbit there. So I think I might do something about Berdyansk, but I think I might just be repeating the same points that I've repeated in the other cities, just into Berdyansk. Not too sure if it's worth repeating. But, okay, here it is, conveniently, so... yeah, this is the post I was looking for earlier. The Cyrillic, who is this from? Part of this channel from the pro-Russian channel, TRT. Yeah. This was posted on the 8th of March, so quite a while ago, quite early into the war. What is the translation of this? Quote, the local authorities in the Zaporozhe region in Berdyansk, occupied by the Russian army, the Russian military, distribute leaflets about a certain referendum and the unification of Russia and Ukraine, end quote. And then, because I'm not, I hope I haven't sworn, I don't think I have sworn. I'll read my little tidbit there. I don't want to swear. So, the pictures of these supposed leaflets have never actually come to light. But the fact that they were talking about this on the 8th of March, if this did indeed happen, I guess that could say that the Russians have always sort of had this mindset from the outset, is that it might just not be the long war that's forced them into it. Is that even if the Russians did achieve their quote-unquote short war goals, that they very well could have always held the same ambitions in Kherson, in Zaporozhe. So that's what I brought up from being at Berdyansk. Quick look and see if there's anything else relevant. Russian soldiers take over the radio station, replace the flags. Yeah, I think if I was to go deep dive into Berdyansk, I would probably just be repeating pretty much the same thing I have just said for the other cities. I'll point out, because it is a bit comical, about Skavdosk. So essentially what the whole spiel of this is that the Russians have been running their own civil military administration in this area. They're putting people in charge, slowly gearing the economy, moving the region away from Ukraine, bringing it under Russian domination and control. But that hasn't been a uniform story of the place, because there is some interesting developments happened in this plucky little city of Skavdosk over the course of the war. So whenever the Russians came up from Crimea, they seem to have largely ignored this area. They didn't really seem to go in here. They mostly went to Kherson, and they pushed up into Energodar and Zaporozhe. They didn't really seem too keen to go into this area for whatever reason. So it was until the 9th of March that the Russians came into Skavdosk. So the duality of Skavdosk. Let's have a quick look at what's happened. So the 9th of March, Russia claims the city of Skavdosk on the Black Sea coast in Kherson Oblast was occupied with no fighting. Police station and administration buildings have been occupied by Russian troops. And then there's footage of the Russians in Skavdosk, the 9th of March. And there was protest. This gentleman just got hit in the face by some kind of mace. But either way, this isn't. It's not a massive protest. It's not really heated, despite the fact that guys got maced. But you know, the demeanor of the soldiers, they're not really worried. Yeah, it is largely peaceful-ish. So, now we go to the 13th of March. And this came out. Ukraine claimed they had liberated Skavdosk from Russian troops. But considering the city is deep behind front lines, it's more likely the Russian troops there pulled out and are allowing the locals to administer themselves for the time being. So, Russian troops left Skavdosk yesterday, the 13th of March. So they left on the 12th to allow the city to administer itself. The mayor of Skavdosk claimed that the local people, they claimed that they forced the Russians out of the city and liberated it themselves. On the 13th of March, so the Russian troops left on the 12th of March, the mayor said they liberated the city themselves. On the 13th of March, the Russian soldiers returned to Skavdosk. Here we go, these are the Russians coming back into, I think this might be the police station or the administration building. So that happened on the 13th. And things just kind of fell into their normal pattern. Then on the 17th, the Russian troops left Skavdosk yesterday on the 16th of March to allow the city to administer themselves. The mayor claimed again. No, wait, this is a repost. Is it a repost? Oh, yeah. Oh, no, this. Okay, so I reposted it again, but yeah. Essentially, the Russians left the city again around about the 16th. The mayor then declared again, we have liberated our city. And I can remember the Ukrainian channels at the time were all crowing, yes, Skavdosk has been liberated again from the Russians. So the Russians left on the 16th. The 17th of March, the Russians came back into the city. And I believe at that stage, they then arrested the mayor. I don't think they've left the city again. So yeah, the story of two cities in Skavdosk. Russians leave, the locals proclaim freedom, the Russians come back, and the pattern emerges again. I don't know if that's really comical, but I kind of found it a bit humorous at the time. But Kherson, Zaporozhe. Yes, I might as well delve a bit into Kharkov. Yeah, so Kharkov had broken away in 2014 as well. So this is the flag of the purported Kherson People's Republic. Kharkov, because it actually did exist for a day at least, it also established its own flag. So if you have an idea of what you're looking at, that is the purported flag of the Kharkov People's Republic. Oh, there you go. That's what it looks like. So as you can see, obviously the two-headed Tsarist eagle is the Russian symbology that I believe that's the flag on the Donetsk People's Republic flag as well. So obviously these purported breakaway attempts look to Russia for their inspiration and for their future. So say if after the events in the Donbass come to a close, and then the Russians go to Kiev and say, okay, these are our demands. Are you going to meet them? No. And Kiev says no. Then Russia might decide, okay, Kherson is now its independent republic. And then if Kiev still refuses to budge, then Russia pumps up the pressure, pushes up south of Kharkov, encircles the city from the south. I'm not going to go into logistics because I've covered that in previous streams if you've minded to go into my autistic ramblings about them. But either way, if the Russians are able to push out of the Donbass, come up from the south behind Kharkov and the push to Poltava, properly encircle the city, eventually take the city, I would expect that the Russians might then decide, okay, we have paid even more blood, sweat, toil, and tears. Ukraine, we now want Kharkov. So unless you basically accede to our demands, we're going to repeat this process until, I don't know, until what? All of Ukraine south and east of the Dnieper is gone. So that could be another estimation, because Kharkov, although the city itself, be spending almost 2 months under Russian artillery fire, I don't think most of the people in that city actually have the mindset of Gonzalo. I think a lot of them have probably been turned quite off against the Russians. But in the parts of Kharkov Kharkov Oblast where the Russians do control, they have been welcomed in certain cities. So the Russians might decide, well, we'll use that population to try and build up a Kharkov Russian-aligned People's Republic in Kharkov as well. So essentially what the Russians could very well end up doing if the Kiev really refuses to budge, is the effective Balkanization of southern and eastern Ukraine. That could be one of the angles that the Russians are going to, and also to just put on more pressure onto Kiev. Because if you have to understand, if the Russians, if they take the Donbass, if they've then taken Kharkov, then that obviously means they must be taken into Poltava. The Russians must really have sorted out all their problems and really be on the ascendancy. Ukraine must really, after this Donbass offensive, Ukraine must seriously be hurting. It'll be hard to see how they can sustain a war. So if the Russians are really in the ascendancy after that, if they've worked out all their problems and they're seriously starting to take land and cities and really threaten into deeper and central Ukraine, the pressure on Zelensky will be either we have to cut our losses here and fight another day, or we will fight to the last Ukrainian and until we're pushed across the Polish border. So the other aspect is, once they're done with this area, I'd expect if the Russians are next going to do an offensive, it'll probably be towards Nikolaev and into Odessa. Then Nikolaev, bit skeptical, but just because of the land bridge they would require might be the clinching factor. But certainly in Odessa, the Russians, lots of Russians refer to Odessa as a Russian city in Ukraine. So for various historical and ceremonial reasons, is if the Russians probably could try and get Odessa as an independent republic, well, quasi-independent republic or part of Russia, I expect the Russians would attempt to do that. So then going back to the economics, if that does come to fruition, that's Ukraine becomes a landlocked nation. I mean, you have to understand if they've lost everywhere south and east of the Dnieper up to Kharkov, that it's quite devastating economically for Ukraine. Not going to say the state Ukraine wouldn't be viable as a nation anymore, but it would, for a long time, it would become a dependent power, because the big industrial goodies it got from the USSR would either be destroyed or they would now be in Russian-held territory. So it wouldn't be like Belarus, where Belarus has quite a thriving industrial sector. That would largely be destroyed in Ukraine. And yeah, that's not to say that Ukraine couldn't do it, because that would still be quite a substantial territory that it would control, but the economic sliders would just be pushed so far in the other way that it would not be good times for the next couple of decades in Ukraine to recover from this, to try and rebuild from this, especially if it's forced into Russian economic reliance, where it's cut off from Western funds and aids to rebuild. So, yeah, I think that is it. So I will call it there, because we're approaching 2 hours. So yeah, thanks for listening, and I hope this has been of use. So see you another time.